Hopefully everyone can hear me. Thank you for coming along to our event today. This is the SME Climate Action, Practical Steps for SMEs to make their businesses more sustainable. It's been brought to you by the IoD and the Centre of Climate Engagement, Hughes Hall, University of Cambridge. So again, thank you very much for coming along and supporting our event today. Just a few practical notes. We have a Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. If you have any questions as we're going along, please put your questions or comments in there. We will come to either at the end or as we're going along, we'll answer in the chat back to you. Just a little note about myself. I am Jenny Nichols. I am the Marketing and Sustainability Manager at the EPI Group, who are an energy consultancy. I'm also the IoD Sustainability Ambassador for Norfolk. Big thank you to all the IoD members who helped to shape these webinars. We had a big questionnaire at the start of the year. We had a really good response from you all, and that's helped to shape the way that we can present it to you today and the topics that we're discussing. If you have any questions for the IoD, please contact us at east@iod.com for any more information that you'd like. We are looking at launching more and more focus groups and events over the Eastern region, so do stay in touch. And now I'd like to hand over to Emily Farnworth, who is the co-director of Hughes Hall Centre for Climate.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and really wonderful to be here today. Looking forward to a fantastic conversation. Just a little bit of background on the Centre for Climate Engagement at Hughes Hall. We work at the sort of cutting edge between looking at bringing the academic work of the University of Cambridge, particularly on climate governance and climate action, into the business community. And it's really great to be partnering with the Institute of Directors. And we're looking forward to this as a kind of kickoff of a series of webinars to identify and to kind of look at some of the opportunities that there are for businesses in the area. We're really excited to focus on small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, for this particular conversation. And we'll be hearing from a number of wonderful speakers who are talking about some of the support that is out there to help SMEs, as well as hearing from different perspectives. And I think whether you are in a small business, whether you're a kind of a small business that's supplying to a big organization, or whether or not you're a big organization that's thinking about your supply chain, I think there are going to be elements of today's discussion that will be really relevant to all of you. So really looking forward to hearing from our panelists. We're going to kick off initially with a presentation from Viola Jardin, who's the Senior Programme Manager at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. And she's going to talk a little bit about the new Canopy Incubator and Accelerator Programme that is supporting SMEs in the area. So Viola, over to you.
Thank you, Emily, and it's an honor to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. So yeah, I suppose the slides can help to share. Thank you very much. So today I have this chance to share a little bit about our views about climate action, as well as what type of support that is out there, including the support that we can provide to SMEs on your kind of climate action journey. So next slide, please. So there is no doubt climate action is now affecting every country on every continent. It's disrupting the global economies and affecting lives, costing people, communities, and countries so much today and even more tomorrow. Around the world, people are already experiencing the significant impacts of climate change, which includes changing weather patterns, rising sea level, and more extreme weather events. Even just today, CNN's news just says that India has seen months of extreme heat, and this week it will only go hotter. The greenhouse gas emissions from human activities are driving climate change and continue to rise. They are now at their highest levels in history. Human activities are damaging and degrading the lands of the earth in an unsustainable fashion, according to a new UN report. Without action, the world's average surface temperature is projected to rise over 21st century and is likely to suppress 3 Celsius degree this century, with some areas of the world expected to warm even more, and the developing countries, especially the poorest, the most vulnerable people, are being affected the most. So the East of England, next slide please, is the second largest English region, covers 15% of the total area of England. The East has a population of 6.24 million people this is a stats from 2018, and 6.27 in 2020. So the region supports a diverse range of habitat, from agriculture landscapes, wetlands, and ancient woodland to heathlands, rivers, and a long low-lying coast. The landscape is more man-made than most in the UK due to the reclamation of land from the sea to create the fens. And fun fact that the most of the fens actually is below sea level. However, the East of England region is also the driest region in the country. The annual rainfall is only 70% of the national average, and less than 20% of the amount of that falls in the Lake District. An estimated 250,000 properties are at risk of flooding in the East, around 8% of the total properties in the region, and more than 50,000 are at significant risk. The East is also a low-lying area with 1/5 of the region below sea level. The specific geology of the coastal areas, like the clay or the sandstone, also make this area particularly vulnerable to erosion. And don't forget, the highest temperature ever recorded in the UK was registered only recently in 2019, when Cambridge Botanic Garden recorded at 38.725 degrees. Not in London, not south, but the east. So to sum up, climate change and the role of human activity in causing it is no longer up for debate. The global scientific communities are united in their calls for urgent action to rapidly reduce emissions in order to avert the worst impact of climate change, as was set out so starkly last month in the latest IPCC report. It is already impacting people around the world and will impact East of England, further degrading our nature resources and creating stranded assets. Cambridgeshire is a thriving economic hub with the world's leading business and long history of leading innovation and change. Every business has a role to play in taking climate action. And as a region, we can be at the forefront of the change. Next slide, please. So at Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, CISO, we have been working in the sustainability space for over 30 years. In the first 3 decades, we worked with policymakers, governments, NGOs, and finance institutions, and big corporates to build up a great range of resources, including knowledge and networks. In this time, we have built a network of more than 20,000 sustainability leaders and spanning in every sector and every continent. And now we want to leverage the resources that we have built to support SMEs and their climate actions. Not only because SMEs account for 99.9% of the business population in the UK, according to FSB stats. Also, everyone has a role to play in climate actions. So CISO's Canopy is a new home for startups and small businesses pioneering sustainability innovation. Whether you are an entrepreneur looking to test your ideas, a startup ready to scale up, or a small business wanting to increase your impact, This new hub for sustainability innovation will support your business development. This soon-to-open space in the center of Cambridge will be the headquarters for CISO and our community. We see it as a collaborative ecosystem, next slide please, like the name of Canopy, providing space, support, networks for sustainable SMEs and startups to thrive and grow. Not only there will be workspace, meeting space, we will also be running Canopy programs throughout the year to provide different business support workshops, sustainability knowledge roundtables, and networking opportunity. This is a community inspired. Not only so, for staffs who have an innovation that tackles systematic sustainability challenges environmentally or socially, we also run different accelerator programs to support innovators. Next slide, please. Here are 10 different themes that we are working on, and each year we are running different programs, sometimes for a particular sector, such as built environment, manufacturing, or even fashion, and sometimes across sectors. We currently have 2 accelerator programs open for applications. Next slide, please. Women in Sustainability Innovation is a 6-week virtual accelerator program to support female founders who have a sustainability innovation. And Circular Disruptor Accelerator is a 2 days in-person program in Cambridge, supporting startups has a circular innovation. Both applications deadline are on the 11th of May.
Could you try again?
Oops, sorry, my Siri very want to jump into the conversation here. Then now, next slide, please. If you are a SME business who made the commitment to make your business more sustainable, Climate Fit is a free online training course to help SMEs to reduce carbon emission and join the collective race to net zero. This is jointly designed by CISO and BSR. We understand that when it comes to addressing climate change, it can be hard to know where to start. The scale of the challenges ahead, coupled with a lack of information and limited resources to initiate changes, and leaves many businesses unsure how to take action. Climate Fit has been specifically designed for SMEs, wherever you are in the world, and whether you are a team of 2 or have hundreds, strong employees with you. This course aims to help small and medium business navigate the path to net zero in 7 achievable steps. So there are 7 different modules, all come with practical actions that you can take. So from the governance and strategies to operations, like how to discover, how to improve your energy efficiencies, cut emissions, and implement kind of renewable energies, to if you have supply chains, and there's also kind of practical steps for you, how to make your supply chain more sustainable through kind of standard procurement process. And if you are offering new product designs, and there's also ways to help you to take the kind of life cycle thinking approach to your design process, as well as there are a lot of green financings out there to help you on this journey. And don't forget, it's important to engage and inspire your employees as well as your community. And finally, the bonus section on the storytelling is try to communicate the progress that you have made, and this will also potentially will be benefiting your business journey. So this is a free and open to SMEs, and it takes 20-30 minutes per module, and it is very interactive and actionable. So when or after you go through each module, you can really feel like I can do something about it. This is time for transformation, and no one can do this alone. As I said earlier, every business has a role to play in taking climate action. And as a region, we can really be at the forefront of this change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Viola. That was so helpful. Really a lot of information that was covered, and incredible that you're able to offer this support to SMEs in the region. I'm sure we will have a lot of questions and also I'm sure interest in learning more about some of the programs that you have coming up. So for those of you that do have questions for Viola, please do put them in the Q&A function, and we will come back to those once we've gone through the next panel. So thank you so much, Viola. It's wonderful to have a number of other speakers joining us now. I'm going to introduce Shelley Lawson, who's the Strategy Director of Frog Bikes, Mark Davidson, who's CEO of Grant Instruments, and we welcome Jenny Nichols back wearing her EPI group hat in the context of this conversation. So I'm going to turn to each of you and just to ask you to give us a little bit of a sense of your journey in the context of the organisation that you work for, some of the ups and downs that you faced as you started to work through your kind of sustainability leadership journey, and any kind of tips along the way for things that you've learned that you'd love to sort of pass on some of that information. Maybe I can go to Shelley first to give you the floor to tell us your story.
Thank you, Emily. So I'm one of the founders of Frog Bikes. We make lightweight children's bicycles. We've been going for about 10 years, and we make about 60,000 bikes a year in our factory in Wales. And sustainability is really important to us, not least because as business owners, we're acutely aware of the emissions that we're responsible for in our day-to-day running of the business, but particularly because we make a product out of aluminium, which is a fairly filthy metal in lots of respects. So people think of bicycles as being very green, and they are in the way that you use them. They're absolutely fantastic, but the way that we make them currently can be improved substantially. So that's really what drives us to make the changes that we're looking at the moment. But it's definitely not all negative. I wanted to mention some of the really substantial benefits we're already seeing from our staff, first of all, which is something Viola mentioned a minute ago. All of our staff are involved in sustainability initiatives in one way or another. And a lot of them appreciate the fact that however much they might do domestically at home with recycling and energy choices and so on, actually when they come to work, they're going to make a much bigger impact on the planet through the decisions that they made, the buying decisions, the processes, the way that we travel, all those sort of things. Actually, it's quite satisfying for them. A lot of people have mentioned this, that they can do more at work than they can ever do at home, which is brilliant. And in the last few months, we've had several people join us who said that during the recruitment process, they were attracted to Frog because of our stance on the environment. So we're already seeing some really tangible benefits internally from working hard on the environment. We expect that our customer base will be switching on increasingly to our emissions stance as well, if I can put it like that. I have to say that right now, if a family goes out to buy a bike, it's not the first thing they're thinking about. How many tons of carbon dioxide do we emit every year? They're thinking about the colour and the size of the bike and the weight of the bike and those sort of things. But that is beginning to change. People are becoming much more responsible consumers and more discerning. And some of the changes I'll talk you through in a minute that we're looking at will take a number of years to deliver, by which time I think consumers are going to be that much more clued up and more discerning about the decisions that they make. I also think in the time that it's going to take us to deliver those things, there's going to be some substantial legislative and tax changes that make emissions even less desirable within your value chain. So my top tip is start now, even if it's difficult, even with the hard things. But to take a step back, there are things that can be done much more quickly. In the first few years of us looking at our emissions, the first things we did was to look at the emissions that are very directly within our control. So what's called scope 1 and scope 2. So how do we heat our building? How do we light it? How do we travel? What sort of vehicles do we use? There are loads of really good carbon calculator tools that are free to use that I would urge businesses to do. Within a few minutes, you can input lots of the data that you have from your own financial reporting, and it gives you a fairly crude idea of what your emissions might be from your transport and your electricity and so on. So that's a really good place to start. And those things are relatively easy to switch as well. Not completely free and not immediate, but within a year or so, in our case, we persuaded both of our landlords in our factory and our offices to switch to renewable energy for all of their tenants on site. So it wasn't quite just flicking a switch, but we got there fairly quickly. The harder things to change for a manufacturing company like ours are what's called scope 3. So these are all of the emissions that are associated with our supply chain. In our case, aluminium and steel and rubber and paint, and the logistics associated with bringing our componentry into Wales, into our factory, and then shipping it out to customers all over the world. Scope 3 means it's not totally within your control. It's mostly the responsibility of your suppliers. And it's also slightly harder to measure. There's not very many good free reporting tools yet on this. You have to dig around, find lots and lots of Google searches on, for example, with us, we needed to know what the emissions are per ton of aluminium when it comes from China, which is where most of our aluminium comes from. That's freely reported, and there's much debate about exactly how many tons of carbon dioxide per ton are emitted, but it's high and it's horrible. So when we started looking at how many bikes do we produce per year and how many miles do we ship them around the planet, those emissions absolutely dwarfed what we were doing by heating and lighting our offices and driving to work. So we quickly realized that's where we needed to focus all our effort, on our scope 3 emissions. And it's taking a number of years to improve those, but we're seeing some progress already. And mostly it's about talking to our suppliers. Sometimes it means educating them because they haven't really been asked these questions before, particularly in the Far East, but putting pressure on them little by little by little with saying, we need to switch from virgin aluminium to recycled aluminium, because we all know from drinks cans, aluminium is endlessly recyclable, but there's not very much of it in the supply chain yet. So it's up to companies like us, who are perhaps on the front foot with this, to push suppliers to start switching. Also, we found quite a lot of traction around our industry. Frankly, every business is trying to do the same thing now, aren't we? We're all trying to reduce our emissions. And for those of us who are smaller businesses, we can work collaboratively with other businesses within our industry and outside it. We often share suppliers, or at least regions where the suppliers are all based. So we can come to them collectively and say, we all want this, you're going to have to adapt. And that's where we've seen a little bit more traction. In some cases, we're also looking at sourcing closer to home, where suppliers are perhaps a bit more amenable to using low carbon energy or to recycling a little bit more. So have a think about your supply chains and see where they might be able to be improved or switched, but also look at product design. So in our case, we've been able to strip out some aluminium and some steel in our bikes by designing them a little bit differently. We have a different spoke pattern in our wheels now, so we've taken out a number of the spokes, which are stainless steel. The wheels are just as strong, we've just used a different spoke pattern, but we're saving quite a lot of stainless steel on every bike. So have a hard look at the product as well. When you know where the biggest emissions are coming from, look at those in detail and work out how you could rethink those. A really important thing in this journey, I think, is communicating what you're doing. Even though you haven't got all the answers on day one, make a commitment that you're going to reduce your emissions and talk people through how you're doing it. And that includes your staff and your customers, your suppliers, but also your bank. We found that financial services are really driving this change. They want all the people that they work with, all the businesses, to reduce their emissions. So talk to them about what you're doing and ask for their support as well, because in our case, we've had quite a lot of support from HSBC who are keen to see us succeeding on this journey. So that's what we've done in the last 2 or 3 years. I'm really happy to answer questions later, and also separately to work with any SMEs that want to talk further about how we do this, because it's something I've become really passionate about in the last few years. I'm really happy to share any learnings that we have.
Thank you so much, Shelley. Really inspirational to think about how much work that you've been doing across this. And I would love to come back to you and learn more about kind of the response that you've had from some of your suppliers, given that you are perhaps one of their, sort of smaller buyers. So maybe we can come back to you on that. I'd love now to turn to Mark to give us, a sense of journey in the context of grant instruments. I'd love to hear, what you've been through and what resonates from what Shelley mentioned too. Yeah, absolutely. So good morning. And it really is morning, so I'll come back to that in a minute. But great to hear from Shelley. She's actually explained really well all the tricky stuff, so I can just kind of colour in the easy bits now, I hope. So we are a scientific
instrument company. We've been going 70 years, which comes with pluses and minuses when you're looking at climate change mitigation, because obviously that means that your infrastructure tends to be a bit older. We employ 65 people and we turn over about 12 million. And we're global. So coming back to my morning point, I'm actually sat talking to you from a hotel room in Pittsburgh, where we have our US distribution operation. Because being an SME, obviously your first imperative as a leader is to be here tomorrow. And therefore you still have to keep the engine running. You still have to make sales. You still have to do the things that you have to do, but you need to do it in the context of reducing your impact on the planet, which can be sometimes a little bit of a conflict, but you have to manage it as best you can. I flew here economy, for example, which has a quarter of the carbon footprint of a business class seat on the plane. So there are things you can still do, even if you have to be a little bit practical in your approach. I think just coming back to the point that Shelley made, measuring what you do is never going to be accurate. But if you can measure the change between where you started and where you are now, that's much more reliable. You're not going to get the data point to be perfect, but at least you can show the trend. Therefore, don't be too intimidated by measuring to the last kilo your carbon output. Just do something that is rational and do the same measurement technique every time, and you'll start to see the arrows going downwards, hopefully. The other thing we did as well was talk to our supply chain. So we use circuit boards from China. We use aluminium as well. We use stainless steel. We don't dig nasty things out of the ground, but we pay other people to do it. And if you've ever seen how rare earths and precious metals are made, it's not a clean process. So we can't say, oh, we're clean because we do everything really nicely and we've got solar panels on the roof. You have to have that focus on everything in your supply chain. But again, just start somewhere and just weed out the worst ones and keep going from there. The other thing we are doing is that we currently live in a 50-year-old building, which leaks heat and therefore money like you wouldn't believe. So we are moving later in the year to a purpose-built facility a couple of miles down the road to get into a building that is A-rated, that won't bleed heat, that will enable us to be much more carbon efficient. Our logistics will be better, staff will be better, etc. And that actually brings on to another point that and just to echo Shelley, we've definitely seen a difference in what people ask at interview in the last several years. People will ask, what is your climate change? And we lead with that actually now. We don't wait for them to ask. Because if you have people coming with expectations of a forward-looking business and they see a slightly dog-eared 50-year-old building, unless you correct that impression, then that's what they think your business is, a business that doesn't really care too much. So we've taken real steps to try to evangelize and make it a part of our business that this is what we're doing. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do, but we're also doing it because it makes money, or it saves money, at least for us. It's the logical commercial thing to do, not just the thing that you want to do for the good of the planet. So I think we can make some really strong arguments, and we've seen that really working. The other thing that we did was to appoint a carbon coordinator. Now that's not a full-time role, it's somebody who has a day job, but it's somebody who is just there to be the champion of the initiatives that we're doing. And I would strongly echo what Shelley and others have said, that you need to build this from the bottom up. If you just have it as management diktats, Mark's latest fad, that's not going to work. People will soon get bored. If you have it as a movement, as an employee-led thing that everybody buys into, then it tends to stick. And people will come to you with ideas about, hey, what if we did that? Or I think we could do that much better. Or do we really need to do that twice? Couldn't we just do it once? Or do we need to paint that component? Couldn't we just have it as grain stainless instead? There's lots of ways that you can eliminate things that have just been done because they've always been done. And the best people to do that are the people who screw the metal together every morning for you. I don't know where these things are, they do. So really involve the staff and get them going on it. We do that within a framework of ISO 14001, which we find really useful as a just overarching strategy framework to measure, monitor, and eliminate emissions, because it kind of forces you to look at your activities and to really keep records. You get audited, obviously, on it, so it keeps you on the straight and narrow. We've looked at our processes as well. So it's not always about materials. Sometimes it's about what you actually do with something. You know, do you need to take a component and send it to and fro between several different suppliers before it comes to you? Could you do it differently so that it just goes once? Could you move product differently so that it goes from A to B instead of A to B to C to D to A? And sometimes it's difficult to correct those things. Sometimes there's really easy wins in shortening the mileage that your components are traveling. I think just to finalize, the thing we found is that you will never get it right. It's like being an entrepreneur in all of your other areas. You will fail, and you will fail frequently. Things will be a damp squib, and you think, well, I thought that would be better than it was. That's true in environmental as well. It doesn't, and it shouldn't discourage you from acting. You should just learn from it, remeasure, and go again. And that's just a normal part of life as an entrepreneur. You get those setbacks, and people don't understand what you're doing, or you invest in something that doesn't quite pay off as you thought it would. Keep going, keep moving, and keep going forward. And I think, just to echo the point that several people have made, we have to start now. You know, there isn't really the luxury of saying, oh, well, we'll plan for that in next year's budget, or, you know, there are many things you can do at almost nil cost this morning. You don't have to wait. So I will terminate my rant there and just conclude my hypocrisy alert that I'm not exactly walking the talk here.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's really interesting hearing you talk about kind of just getting on with things. And I don't know, I quite like the idea of Mark's latest fads. I think they're probably quite inspirational things for the organisation to do. Our final panelist is Jenny Nichols. So maybe Jenny, I can ask you to come back in and talk a little bit about your experience at EPI Global. And again, you know, any reflections on what you've heard from Shelley and Mark would be super helpful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Really would agree with Shelley and Mark that, you know, the time is now to get going. If it wasn't a couple of years ago, really it is now. We started our sustainability journey in 2018. We had a new CEO at the time, and he was really passionate about ensuring that the business wasn't only here for now, but it was here for the future. And we weren't impacting the ability for the company to generate money and to work and to thrive in the future by what we were doing back then. So we really started looking at where our biggest impacts were. And similar to Shelley, our biggest impact was in our scope 3 emissions. We are a small consultancy. There's only 30 of us. We don't produce anything. It's all intellectual, and it's a service we provide for people. But to do that, we send people out all over the world to work for our clients. We work with big oil, which is, you know, we're often seen as the bad boys, but we'll also work with an awful lot of renewable companies. We work with a lot of construction companies. So we're very much involved in that sort of sector of initial digging holes in the ground and all that kind of thing. But travel really was a huge impact. We spent millions of dollars a year on moving people around the world. Our other impacts were very small, really. We have a couple of offices. We were able to move those to renewable energy. It's a quick win, but also we really focus on reducing our energy consumption. You know, how many of us, it's a really old-fashioned thing, but how many of us actually switch everything off at the wall at the end of the day? I know this has been in the news this morning about these vampire devices we all have in our houses that if you don't switch your telly off at the wall, it costs you £140 a year. It's not just the monetary value, well, that's using up electricity unnecessarily. So we had a really big drive at the end of each day and the end of the working week, switching off all the heating and the air conditioning and everything like that. And that reduced our energy bills by 1/3 purely by doing that over a year. So it has a huge impact, just really simple measures. We also moved to a paperless office. We were very, very paper intensive. We would literally get invoices into the office, scan them in, do stuff with them, print them out again, and then sending them off to our clients. And you think, that's just madness, you know? And even things that would come in electronically to us, we would print them out, rescan them in, to get them into a different system. So we really invested in our back end to be able to change the way that our whole invoicing and accounts payable procedures worked. And it's all completely paperless now, which is brilliant. So again, it's energy saved, it's paper saved, and there's much less man hours stood in front of a scanner and a printer, you know, doing ridiculous things like that, which would all get shredded and put into landfill at the end of the week. So that is being completely removed, which is brilliant. Another thing that has been forced upon us, partly by the pandemic, because as you can imagine, it's been very difficult moving people around the world for the past couple of years. And just down to the, you know, having to quarantine people, or the lack of availability of flights of where you want to go, or some countries like Australia not letting people in. So it's really been quite challenging. So we've really changed the way that we're working with our consultants. We have a global pool of 2,500 consultants. So really trying to use the consultants that are in country. So we call it local content. So providing our clients with that local content mitigated all that quarantine, it mitigated having to get visas, it mitigated issues of having people stranded in countries when they couldn't get home because of various of opening and closing borders. But actually, that's had a huge impact on how efficient we are at working, and how you know, reducing our scope 3 emissions through travel for business. And we've also really looked at our own internal BD travel. So when we go and visit a client, we don't just go and visit one client. We will arrange a whole suite of clients to go and visit over a week or so, and really reduce the number of times we might go and visit a certain country. Just again, to be more efficient and just really think about things that we're doing. We have KPIs where we look at business travel going in car versus public transport. Again, that's been a bit tricky over the past couple of years because people haven't necessarily wanted to go in public transport, and that's quite understandable. But, you know, again, with certain COVID mitigations, you can make that happen. It's about the kind of willingness to do it, and, you know, as long as you don't have vulnerable people, you would never force someone to go on public transport. But it makes much more sense, and it's, you know, it's more efficient. You can get there easier, especially when you're talking about going in and out of London. They've been the main things that we've done, and it's been really effective. We have been accredited just in March this year for our second year carbon neutral. We have done that by offsetting, and I know for some people that's kind of like a big no-no, but for us, we would never be able to completely reduce all our emissions to zero without doing that. And so we try to do it as ethically as possible. So we've looked at, there's a great organisation called Gold Standard, and although there is no actual standard of what carbon offsets need to come up against, they have their own internal standard, which is really, really good. It also, they have, I think each of the carbon credits need to support at least 4 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and they need to show an ongoing lasting impact in the country and in the area that you're investing in. So it's not just a case of tree planting and leaving it at that. The scheme that we as a company invested in is something called CO2 to H2O. So it was in Mali, where a village that we looked after, helped to invest in, normally would cut down trees to boil water to have safe drinking water. But it, you know, there was never enough trees. The water was particularly grim to start with. If it didn't get boiled properly, then the villages were still getting poorly. So we helped to invest in boreholes, so they could pump out clean fresh water from aquifers in the ground. And it also helped to pay for training. So the boreholes could be looked after by the people who lived in the villages, and just to ensure ongoing maintenance, so there wasn't a disruption to supply. And the money that then the people of the village were able to do by, you know, being able to work rather than spend hours looking for water and wood, or for who were able to go to school or able to start their own businesses. It has a huge lasting impact in the area it is. So if you are looking at offsetting, I would really strongly recommend that you look at something that has that kind of lasting impact. It's not just a quick win, plant a few trees, that's it. You know, it has to have a more meaningful impact. That's pretty
much. Thank you so much.
It's
really helpful, Jenny. really interesting to kind of hear maybe some of the different challenges that you have as a service provision business, and also how the pandemic's sort of impacted what you've been able to do. It's really, really helpful. I might ask Viola to come back and join us on camera as well now, as I start to open up the Q&A section. I haven't seen any questions coming through, but if you have got questions, please do send them through the Q&A function, and we'll get to them. But maybe whilst we're waiting for participants to raise questions, maybe just one question going back to you, Viola. I mean, you've heard these different stories. I'm sure you hear similar stories from some of the other organisations that you work with. What do you sort of take away as some of the sort of initial sort of things that you think, you know, are really kind of the top 3 things that any SME can or should do in that first step of the journey?
Thank you. So yes, it was fascinating listening to 3 panelists' stories. I really love it. And I think particularly love the fact that, you know, doing now, there's always something that you can do. And so I think from our perspective, first 3, if I say top 3 things, the first thing is that fact you need to have that commitment, that you tell yourself as a business, we want to do this. And sometimes you will be surprised that commitment will actually get you really far. So that is probably, for me, it's very much, you know, the motivation behind every actions, right? So for first part, I would definitely say, you know, make the commitment. Tell yourself this is the right thing to do, and this is good for business. You have heard from 3 panelists, their story, their journey. There is a business case to make it your own business more sustainable. You can benefit from it. So that's the first part. And I also really like the, I think Mark making comments on, you know, sometimes it's really hard to measure. So don't be overwhelmed by the fact that, oh, I have to count down to, you know, every single numbers to know, because I know there's a sentence they said that they shared that if you don't measure it, you can't actually reduce it. But that's not entirely true. If you are able to really just benchmark it, then that's a lot easier to just every single step in each part of your business. There's a lot of things you can do. And I think the third part, I would say there are a lot of resources that is out there. So for example, the Climate Fit, the kind of online training course that I shared, as well as, you know, IoD, like running today's event, for example, because there's very much a community type of support. And it's important because we all have very limited resources in terms of money, time, and energy. So within the communities, there are a lot of things, you know, businesses here today already have done it, or it goes through some sort of a journey. So if you are able to really find those resources, you know, have a call, have a coffee, and just ask how do other people do it, it will save you a lot of time and potentially money as well to really get onto these climate actions. So that would be very much my takeaway.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Viola. And I think that that sense of just getting on with things now is really valuable. I was struck actually, Jenny, by how much you saved in terms of energy just with switching things off. I mean, I feel like, okay, I might need to do an audit on my own house after hearing that. We have a couple of questions that come in, and then I did say I wanted to get back to Shelley with a question I had for her earlier. So the first question, Jenny, was just a quick one for you. You mentioned a company with CO2 to H2O. What was the company name?
Yeah, so that's a charity called United Purpose, who are based in Cardiff, and they work with a lot of organisations across the developing world to set up these kinds of ways of offsetting, but also benefiting villages, towns, schools, medical centres, all that kind of thing. And that's been accredited through an organisation called Gold Standard. So also have a look at Gold Standard, because they're brilliant. They've got all sorts of different kind of schemes that you can have a look at and get inspiration from.
Super, that's really helpful. Thank you. And another really good question that's come through, particularly when you hear some of the statistics around how climate change is impacting this region in particular in terms of sea level rise and flooding issues, etc. There's a question here around, we've talked a lot about, or heard a lot of stories about reducing emissions. But it would be great to hear from all of you about some of the things you've been looking at in terms of building climate resilience, or needing to adapt to climate change, whether it's within your own operations or kind of talking to your suppliers. So I don't know, Mark, maybe can I kick off with you?
Yeah, sure. So the building that we're moving to, for example, has what looks to me like monsoon-proof roofing. The drainage that we need now is probably a lot higher spec than the drainage that we needed 30 years ago, because we just get a lot more rain and we get it in sudden bursts. So simple things like, what happens if we get really heavy rain or flooding or that kind of stuff, I think is becoming more pertinent, as we have to get the hang of the fact that, yeah, we can't really stop it. We can mitigate it and start to reverse it over time, but for now, we're going to get these things. I think the other thing is definitely around suppliers, particularly if you get things from coastal cities, then there are going to be flood events and you need to be aware that your supply chain could be impacted. The last company I worked for had a base in Calcutta, and they had a really bad time with monsoon floods and just couldn't service their cloud customers because their engineers were in Calcutta and they were flooded out and couldn't get to work. So these things can and do happen, and you can't always predict and avoid all of them, but I think you can go through your supply chain and your processes and think, what if, and just start to make some mitigations and have some plan B.
I like that that what if question is a really good one, just to kind of brainstorm and kind of be, kind of have a good understanding across the business. It's really helpful. Shelley, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, probably similar to Mark. So we've had a look at our premises in the UK and assess them for risk of floods and fires, and our offices are actually surrounded by woodland, and in recent times there's a big common fire quite close to us for the first time in decades. So we can see that the risk of that is ever increasing. So looking at our cloud computing, knowing that if the office was to burn to the ground, that all of our intellectual property, our ability to keep going as a business is saved, because we're paperless as well, so everything's on the cloud. So quite frightening things like that we need to think through, but that is realistic. And also, like Mark, very much looking at the supply chain, and whilst trying to find suppliers that are lower carbon, that's also helped us spread our risk by developing several new suppliers. So if one was completely unable to operate due to any number of geopolitical or climate-related risks, we have other suppliers who'd be able to scale up, or at least keep us going for the time being. So yeah, this is not stuff we thought about at all when we started the business 10 years ago, and now it's become quite normal practice to discuss these things.
Yeah, and I mean, just on that follow-up question, how much response have you got from your suppliers? And I don't know how many of your kind of customers, how many of your suppliers you're a kind of big part of their business, but I'd just be intrigued for the ones where you're perhaps sort of at the smaller end of the scale. Yeah. How have they been responding to you?
Yeah, that's a really pertinent question. We're probably not one of the bigger customers of any of our suppliers in the Far East, and we mostly had a pretty hostile response when we started talking about emissions, trying to get data that was at all traceable or reliable on the materials that we currently buy is quite challenging. That is beginning to change. I'd say just in the last 6 months, we're starting to see more doors being opened and slightly more engagement there. Partly we did that by shopping around and finding new suppliers who were already using low carbon aluminium, for example, or switching to greener energy. But also, I think our suppliers recognize that we're not the only customer asking these questions now. I would say that, again, there's so many global issues that are all tied up together in the last couple of years, but partly because of the horrendous global supply chains and the increase in shipping costs, as well as the associated emissions, we are looking to reshore some of our bigger componentry supplies. And we've been talking to people like oil and gas suppliers, suppliers to the oil and gas industry in Scotland, who see a decline in that market. So they used to make a number of metal parts for oil rigs, for example. They can see that industry declining dramatically, but they have a lot of the skills that are also needed in making a bicycle frame. So we're starting to talk to people like that who are looking to pivot, have already got the skills and the expertise, and in many cases, very good environmental credentials. And we're passing some business their way, and they're quite excited about being approached by the bike industry because they see us as a growth industry, especially e-bikes and light electric vehicles. We're all asking for the same questions now, and we're seen as an industry with a strong future.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. That's kind of like net zero transition in practice, isn't it? Really exciting.
Okay.
Just in the interest of time, I'm going to turn to a couple more questions and to Jenny and Viola. This question around building this sort of net zero transition, the broader sustainability journey into the sort of strategy and business planning cycle. In terms of sort of how that's happened well, maybe kind of to you, Jenny, first, and then Viola, kind of maybe some of the experience that you've seen, and obviously open to Mark and Shelley to jump in as well, but just be interested to understand sort of how has that process worked in terms of actually aligning your goals with your business planning and business strategy.
Yeah, that's really interesting what Shelley was just saying actually about oil and gas supply companies pivoting, because that's essentially what we're doing. We're an energy company that worked almost exclusively with oil and gas companies for the past nearly 40 years now, and in the past 5 years we've really started to pivot, and we work a lot with renewable companies. Certainly we have a big environmental section, which kind of probably sounds a bit of an oxymoron, but it's looking out for protected species in the sea, and that's a transferable skill because it's exactly the same job regardless of who your end client is. We're also looking, we do a lot of work with geoscience, and we're looking at how those skills can be transferred into working with geothermal. And actually, again, the skills are very, very transferable. They're very similar. You know, it's about fluid rates within a reservoir. Just because it's oil versus water, you know, your calculations are slightly different, but the methodology and the actual science is exactly the same. So being able to look at slightly to look at sectors that are adjacent, shall we say, to where you currently work, is really valuable, and to to look at suppliers as well as your own company where you can service. That's a really important thing to be able to do, because you're strengthening and you're broadening and you're diversifying. It's only a positive really from that point of view.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. Viola.
So from our view is that we believe the whole kind of green has to be into kind of the governance and strategy first, because that's the top layers of the whole business operation. So if you set the governance and the strategy right from the start, then every other single part of your business, you have a kind of a North Star to follow. And so definitely, I feel that is something that sometimes a business, especially for SMEs, because they are so busy with the daily operations, you feel like, oh, do I really need to go back to the governance or strategies or mission and value part of things? And from our perspective, we do believe that's important, because only if you go back to highest level, then you set it right, then you are able to take that holistic view into kind of the whole business operation, and as well as the journeys from business planning cycles and everything. Then you have the kind of that mission to guide you. What are the most important things here that we don't compromise while we are considering the revenue or business development and some sort. So yeah, I think I will just top up a little bit my own views there.
Yeah.
If I can just jump in here, Emma,
of course.
A quick reflection. So our strategy at the very, very top level boils down to 4 words, 4 abstract nouns basically, and 2 of those are simplicity and sustainability, and they're quite linked. We're trying to simplify our business wherever we can, so that we don't have a process that doesn't need to be there, we don't have a component that doesn't need to be there, we don't have a product that doesn't sell, because that means you've got to make it, and so we go. But that sustainability is one of the top 4 words that we define everything else by as we cascade down into the detailed strategy. And I think you have to take it right at that top level. It has to be in the core. When you cut you in half, that's the word that should be in the rock stick. Otherwise, it's just an add-on.
Yeah. And Shelley, does that reflect for you too?
Yes, exactly the same. We have our 4 Ps in Frog: people, planet, profit and product, in no particular order. They're all the equal pillars that hold us up, and that's reflected in everybody's objectives. We all know that we need to deliver on all 4 of those things really equally. So I think setting that right from day one means that the planet is reflected in every decision we make. As Mark said earlier, it doesn't mean we'll get it all right. And sometimes we've had to compromise. We've shamefully had to air freight some components in the last 18 months because supply chains have been so broken. But we have tried everything to avoid that sort of activity. We know that we shouldn't do that. We will honestly measure it and report it and apologise for it and try harder next year. But it's reflected in everything that we try to do.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you're aware of that, you know, and you're looking for alternatives, I mean, I think that's half the battle really, is to sort of have that level of understanding. Very interesting. I'm going to take one final question from participants, and then we'll have maybe time for a little bit of a wrap up at the end. So a question that's come in about how much you engage in the circular economy kind of conversation, or how have you found that sort of circular economy thinking useful as part of your sustainability journeys?
I'm happy to jump in here very briefly. That we would say that becoming truly circular is sort of the end goal for us. So all the things that I talked about earlier are what we're starting to work on now. Our ultimate goal is to get back a bike at the end of its life, take it all apart, use all the bits again, refurbish, repurpose, recycle if we need to, and all those materials go out again. That's relatively difficult for quite a low value but quite large product. It's not very cost effective to bring a bike back from Canada that we sold 7 years ago that's got no commercial value, and the aluminium is worth maybe $4, whatever it is. That's quite challenging. We're going to have to do that collaboratively with probably across the whole of our industry, maybe the automotive industry as well. Anyone who uses our kind of materials, we need lots and lots of regional hubs where your old goods go and get disassembled or assessed and then go back into our supply chains fairly locally. So that's why I think it will take us till nearly 2050 to be carbon neutral, because some of those things are really hard to build at the kind of scale that we're operating at the moment. In the meantime, we're just trying to elongate the life of all of our products by encouraging local servicing within the bike stores that we sell the bikes through, for example, providing lots of spares and doing a sort of MOT, a re-warranty service through the bike stores so that the bikes can carry on as long as possible. And so we can get data back in about what's beginning to wear out on a bike that's 8 years old, for example, so we can continually improve the designs to extend the longevity of the bike. So there's a lot of commercial opportunity in there, but it's going to be probably the hardest nut to crack.
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
Sorry, I was just about to say, I mean, this idea of regional hubs, I mean, it sounds like there's an awful lot that can be done across this sort of idea of networking and building this global community. Really interesting. Sorry, Mark, you were...
No, I was just going to echo some of those points. It is difficult. I think one of the things that we are trying to do now more is not just design for manufacture, but design for disassembly, so that you try not to use one-time press fixings that you then have to break the device to get it back apart again. You know, there are ways and means that you can put things together in manufacturing that are reversible, and there's plenty of ways you can do it that aren't. So just simple little decisions like that in designing the product can make a big difference to what you can do with it at the end of its life.
Really fascinating. I don't know, Jenny, Viola, is there anything else particularly you wanted to jump in at?
Jenny, you want to go first? Let's see.
No, I was just saying, no, I really agree with that. And, you know, where you can't utilize your local economies, then the collaborative approach is really useful. If you can do that across industry and across continents, that's really powerful way of being able to mimic that kind of supply chain.
So I basically work with a lot of let's say they call circular innovators, so a lot of different type of circular innovations. And we often have one thing to kind of share with them or ask them to take into consideration is that quite often if you develop, say, a recycled product or product from the recycled materials, and yes, it's great, but quite often the kind of business model has to go hand in hand to shift in order to actually make it circular. So circular economy, in our view, is not just one stage of it; it's the whole process of it that actually will come back. So sometimes it is quite difficult. I'm sure Mark and Shelley probably share similar pain. Sometimes is that the infrastructure also need to be able to support it. If the infrastructure doesn't support it, sometimes it's so hard for businesses to move truly circular. just want to add down here.
Wonderful. That is a really rich conversation, and I know we're kind of coming to time, and maybe if I can just do a quick wrap up from everything you said. There's so many amazing things that you've already said, but I think I took away the sort of like, do it now, you know, don't wait for perfect data. There's plenty of things you can get on with. We talked a lot about the kind of, you know, bottom up and top down, you know, the importance of getting everybody engaged, but by the same token, needing that kind of real clear sort of business strategy, and just really kind of understanding, you know, the sort of full value chain, if you like, of kind of where you sit as a business, and not being afraid to sort of reach out and have conversations with your supply chain. I think that was really, you know, quite inspirational to see and hear some of the things that you're thinking about and doing. So just to wrap up, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time today, and thank you for everyone who's listened in. Really appreciate those insights, and I'm sure we'll be sharing them across the group. Just one final mention, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the first of a series of webinars that we're going to be running with the IoD. The next one is on green technology on the 14th of July. So mark your diaries, and I'm sure the team will be reaching out with more information about that shortly. Thank you all so much. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.